Sino-American relationship today is obviously mixed. The areas of cooperation, although they're significant, are actually smaller, and the forces that tend to promote them are weaker than is widely assumed. By contrast, and contrary to what is often said, the competitive tendencies that we see today are not merely the product of misunderstandings or misperceptions or readily correctable policy errors, although these certainly play a role at times. Rather, the competitive aspects of the relationship spring from two forces. First are the age-old dynamics of power politics. There's a second factor, which I think complicates things a good deal, and that is ideology. One often hears it said that because China is no longer truly a communist country, there's no basis for ideological tension or rivalry between the US and China. And it may be true that China's leaders are today no longer Marxists, but they are still Leninists, by which I mean they believe in the continued rule of China by a single party, the Communist Party of China, and they are determined to maintain that rule. They regard the United States as a crusading ideological nation that wants to see them eventually displaced from power. So the bottom line, in my view, is that if we stay on the trajectory that we're currently following, and we may not, in other words, if China continues to grow richer and stronger, but it continues also to be ruled by a one-party authoritarian regime, the competitive aspects of the relationship will expand, and the cooperative elements, although they may remain, will dwindle in significance. This doesn't mean that conflict between the United States and China is inevitable. I don't believe that it is. To deal with this mixed relationship, the United States has developed a mixed strategy. And that strategy has evolved over the years, but it has proven thus far to be quite resilient and quite stable. Whoever is elected in 2012, I think, will follow more or less the same strategy. And that strategy consists of two elements. The first is engagement through trade, through diplomacy, through people-to-people exchanges, scientific cooperation, and so on, to encourage China to become a member in good standing of the existing international system. The other part is what I would call balancing. The goal of this balancing part of American strategy, largely unspoken, is to deter aggression, to maintain stability, maintain and preserve the status quo, while the processes of engagement work their magic on China and bring about this transformation that I referred to earlier, as long as that may take. For its part, China, too, has been pursuing a consistent strategy towards the United States and towards other countries in its region. And the essential idea motivating that strategy is embodied in Deng Xiaoping's 1991 so-called 24-character strategy, the key phrase of which is usually translated as hide our capabilities and bide our time. And this basic approach can be broken down into three axioms. The first is avoid confrontation. The second is build comprehensive national power. The third element of China's strategy is embodied in the axiom, advance incrementally. What are the ultimate goals of this three-part Chinese strategy? I believe that the objectives of China's current leaders and of their most likely successors can be summarized in the following way. First and foremost, to preserve the exclusive grip on political power of the Chinese Communist Party. As an extension of that desire to maintain CCP rule, China has, I believe, also sought to displace the United States as the preponderant power in East Asia. Chinese strategists do not believe that they can accomplish their goals quickly or through a kind of frontal assault on the American position in Asia. Rather, their goal, their hope is, to use the famous phrase from the Chinese philosopher and theorist Sun Tzu, to win without fighting. And they seek to do this by maintaining good relations with the United States, if at all possible, while building up China's power, dampening down any tendencies on the part of the United States or its regional allies to build up their own capabilities or to cooperate more closely in order to counter China's growing strength, to gradually weaken the foundations of America's alliances, and eventually to create a situation in which overt resistance to China's goals will appear to be futile, and in which regional powers, like Japan, will have little choice but to reach the best possible accommodation that they can with China. In general, it seems likely that as China's power grows, it will feel freer to pursue more openly goals that are at odds with those of the United States and others in Asia. What about China's efforts to establish itself as the preponderant regional power? Here again, the verdict is mixed and it's open to debate. In the military domain, for the past 20 years, China has engaged in a rapid, sustained, and serious buildup of its military capabilities. And indeed, Beijing announced just today that in the coming year it will increase defense spending again, as it has over most of the last 2 decades, by double digits, in this case 11.2%. In the economic sphere, thanks largely to the gravitational pull of its enormous and growing economy, China is already the strongest force in continental Southeast Asia, and its influence in Central Asia is growing. And it has sought and succeeded in establishing deep economic ties with the maritime states of Northeast and Southeast Asia, countries which are generally more prosperous than those on continental Asia, more democratic, and in many cases, which are also treaty allies of the United States. The Obama administration came into office intending to maintain the basic approach of combining engagement with balancing, but to alter the mix of the elements somewhat. Basically, I think what they hoped to do was to enhance and expand engagement with China, to broaden it and to deepen it to include, for example, issues like climate change, while downplaying areas of disagreement, like human rights. Starting in the latter part of 2009, this initial approach encountered a series of setbacks. China was seen not only in the United States, and I think even not primarily in the United States, but rather throughout Asia, to be behaving more assertively across a wide range of fronts. In the case of Japan, as I'm sure you're well aware, the Chinese government, in my view, essentially chose to escalate an incident in which Japan arrested a drunken Chinese fishing boat captain into a major international incident. Instead of unwinding it, they chose to increase the pressure, raising it to an unprecedented level. Starting in 2010, the Obama administration has responded to these Chinese actions appropriately, in my view, by increasing its emphasis on the balancing side of U.S. strategy. The administration has sought to underline its commitment to maintaining a favorable balance of power in Asia, even as China's power continues to grow. It may be that what we've been seeing are manifestations of deeper and perhaps more long-lasting changes within China itself. A change in widely shared assessments of trends in the distribution of power, a view which has been growing, I think, certainly since the financial crisis that began in 2008, 2009, that the United States is declining and China is growing in power more rapidly than had been expected. There's also been an ongoing and I think continuing intensification and spread of a more aggressive form of nationalism, patriotism, mixed in some instances with an unhealthy dose of militarism. My own view is that, as has been true in the past, reports of impending American decline are greatly exaggerated. The United States has deep and enduring strengths due to, among other things, its political stability, favorable demographics, capacity for innovation, and access to natural resources, including thanks to recent advances in extractive technology, oil, and natural gas. And China, by contrast, has significant challenges in all of these areas that may well impede its future economic growth. That said, at least for the next several years, the United States government will have to operate within tight financial constraints as it seeks to narrow annual budget deficits and to reduce the level of national debt. Among other things, this will likely result in cuts in defense spending, making it more difficult for the United States alone to respond in an effective and timely way to China's continuing military buildup. The United States is going to need more help from its friends and allies in the region if it's going to be able to maintain a favorable balance with China as China grows stronger. The combination of increasing Chinese assertiveness, if that's indeed what we're facing, and temporary self-imposed American restraint could make the coming decade in the Asia-Pacific region more difficult and more dangerous than the one that has just passed. And now, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions. I think that one of the key objectives of Chinese strategy, as I've described it, is effectively to neutralize Japan, to encourage Japan to, over time, pull away from the United States, leaving it then vulnerable to pressures from China. I think also that China's behavior in the last several years has set back any prospect of achieving that by decades, that their interactions with Japan have been totally counterproductive. And some people in China recognize this, but nevertheless, any prospect that they might succeed in doing this, I think, has been reduced by their own behavior towards Japan. From an American perspective, Japan is central to American efforts to maintain a stable balance of power in the region, in part because, contrary to some Chinese perceptions, Japan remains extremely powerful, has a large economy, has very substantial and sophisticated military capabilities of its own, also continues to cooperate with the United States and provide the U.S. with access to facilities that allow us to project power into the region. But also, there's something else that's happening, which I don't think is the result of American planning, but which is actually quite beneficial, and that is that countries in the region are on their own increasing their dialogue and cooperation with one another. So Japan and India, Japan and Australia, Japan and South Korea to some degree are talking together about their shared concerns regarding growth of Chinese power. And Japan and the other countries that I've mentioned will on their own pursue policies that they see as being in their own interests, which I think will contribute to a stable balance of power in the long run. So in my view, Japan is central to this. It's one of several players, but in East Asia, it's clearly the most important. majority of people in Taiwan don't favor independence, just as they don't favor absorption into the mainland. They favor the status quo for the time being. I think the name of the game in the case of Taiwan is to play for time, to make clear to China that if it uses force, that will have great costs, that it could provoke a military conflict with the United States, that if they proceeded in that way, they would damage their relations with other countries in the region, that it would be enormously costly. However, having said all of that, China has been pursuing a very intelligent strategy towards Taiwan, which involves maximum economic openness and interdependence, making Taiwan more and more dependent on its economic relationship with the mainland, reaching out to political groups in Taiwan that favor, if not unification, are more friendly to China than those that are opposed to it, while at the same time building up this overwhelming military capability directed at Taiwan. But I think the policy that the United States and others have been pursuing is the best one available, because if Taiwan were to move towards formal independence, it would provoke the mainland into taking steps that could be disastrous for everyone.